case. The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the honourable member Andrew Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the nature of this bill and statutes amendment bills, we will, of course, support this bill. It does a number of tidy-up jobs on various pieces of legislation. That much the Minister has just said. But, sir, it's an opportunity to reflect on those pieces of legislation that appear in the bill and see whether we can find a common thread or weave a common thread or make some sense out of it. And, Mr. Speaker, I've been through them in some detail, and I am struck by some of the admittedly minor changes to some very, very important pieces of legislation, some to do with the judiciary, some to do with our judicial processes, some to do with other administrative processes. And I am just wondering whether actually through this Statutes Amendment Bill, this government is setting up an escape path for a recalcitrant minister. Because if you have a look at some of these provisions, Mr. Speaker, there is a very unusual thread of commonality that goes through it. Let me start with the Judicial Conduct Commissioner and Commission Bill. Let me just clarify the exact name, because I wouldn't want to mislead the tens of thousands of people who have tuned in, especially this afternoon, to watch the passage of this legislation and put them wrong. So it's the Judicial Conduct Commissioner and Judicial Conduct Panel Act 2004. So this is a piece of legislation that allows those who are aggrieved by what has happened to them in court before a judge to take action. And indeed the Judicial Conduct Panel has dealt with some justified complaints against judges. It's very difficult, of course, because most of the people who are aggrieved at the conduct of judges are usually those who've lost their case before a judge. But there are some who are treated peremptorily and unfortunately and in an inappropriate way, and they make complaints, and they can have those complaints heard and a sort of a second tier of justice delivered. Well, the changes in this Statutes Amendment Bill for the Judicial Conduct Commission and Judicial Panel Bill does two things. Allows the Deputy Commissioner to do what the Commissioner can do once the Commissioner has delegated it to the Deputy. And it also allows the Commissioner to dismiss a complaint already dealt with. And I just make this point, Mr. Speaker, and of course it wouldn't be a matter for a Statutes Amendment Bill, but in reflecting on this piece of legislation and the processes that it enacts, isn't it a pity that the judges themselves don't have a body to go to complain about injustices done against them? And they might well lay a complaint against none other than the Minister of Justice. Not because of dinners she's had in Shanghai and her travel itinerary in all parts of the world on behalf of her husband's company, but her comments and her attitude towards our judiciary. And it is absolutely epitomised by the comment she made on the weekend in an interview on a prospective victims commissioner, when she said of our judicial system that she agreed with a statement that this is not a court of justice, this is a court of law. She said of our judiciary, this is not a court of justice, this is a court of law. That came from our Minister of Justice. It wasn't Billy Bragg and his famous song about the appalling nature of the bail system in the United Kingdom. This was the New Zealand Minister of Justice talking about our system of justice on the 6 o'clock news on Sunday night on TV1. And if I was a judge in this country, of whatever court, I would be horrified. And I would be looking for a process by which to complain against that minister. Perhaps they won't have to look much longer if the present Minister of Justice meets her just desserts and is gone by the end of the week, because she certainly should do so. Then I want to go to the Official Information Act. This is a very interesting piece of legislation because it allows for oral requests to be made, and then for those oral requests, if they're not clearly understood, to be then put into writing by whoever receives the request, including ministers. And it also allows a refusal of a document that cannot be found, providing a reasonable effort has been made to locate the document. And so our requests for information about, for example, Michelle Bogue and her complaint about the Minister of ACC and her breach of privacy, well, we were told it couldn't be found. And so, Mr Speaker, this provision may well provide a mechanism by which to get information from that minister. I might say this about the Minister of Justice, who is the minister responsible for the Official Information Act. She must have the most appalling record of responses to Official Information Act requests. I have not received a response to an Official Information Act request that has not been heavily redacted, that has not been concealment of information. But this seems to be the flavour of this minister. Rather than be open and upfront and transparent, she conceals everything. And it now turns out she's got a lot to conceal. There is a lot of conduct that she wants to hide. And so questions are now being asked, and we wonder whether this change to the Official Information Act and this Statutes Amendment Bill might enable us just a smidgen further in her door to find out what's actually going on and what it is that she's hiding. And then I turn to the Ombudsman Act, because there's a change to the Ombudsman Act in this statute as well. This allows the Ombudsman or an Ombudsman to refuse to commence an investigation if he or she judges it necessary to do so. Now, that's quite a sensible provision, uncontroversial in any other way, except that who is the minister responsible for the Ombudsman and the Ombudsman Act? It is the Minister of Justice. Oh, the Minister of Justice. Because here's the thing. When you can't get an answer, a proper answer, or a heavily redacted answer to your Official Information Act request, where do you go? You go to the Ombudsman's office. And the same minister is in charge of that, in that office too. And what do we find? The poor old Ombudsman's office snowed under, predominantly because of ministers who fail to answer their Official Information Act requests. Right. And the Minister of Justice is the worst. The Minister of Justice is the worst. So I hope that the Associate Minister, who has shepherded this bill into the House today takes note, because he may have to step up very soon. And we want responsible people. We want responsible people ready to step up and take up these senior roles, and perhaps the Associate Minister, when he gets the opportunity in a few days' time to pick up the cudgels of the real job, the big job, will make a difference in this regard. Then, of course, we have the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act, and there's no question that I think the current Minister of Justice will want to resort to her rights and obligations under this Act very soon, if she hasn't already. This provision under the Statutes Amendment Bill allows objections to licences that are limited to the suitability of the applicant. So the only ground on which you can object to an application for a licence is the suitability of the applicant. Now, whether or not the present Minister of Justice through this bill is actually preparing her way for a career change, I'm not sure, but if she does, she's in trouble. She's in trouble under this provision because it allows you to oppose an application for a licence on the grounds of character. That is to say, if you're not a person of good character, you cannot hold a liquor licence. And so I just say to the present Minister of Justice, be careful, because that career option may be closed off to you. Because we cannot have Ministers of Justice leaving that post who want to go off and sell alcohol when they've left that post under a cloud of suspicion of wrongdoing. We cannot have that. And then finally, there is the Sentencing Act, Mr Speaker. There is the Sentencing Act, and that is an interesting provision because it deals with what happens when an offence is committed in a car that is not your own. And so a minister who transgresses, who commits an offence in a ministerial limousine, for example, the car can still be seized. The car can be seized and disposed of, and the funds, and that, well, it may well be crushed. And so I can foresee a Minister of Justice who's been recently pushed out of her role going off to apply for a liquor licence that she cannot get, sells liquor anyway, and has the car that she's in seized by the Crown. And none of this is any good. But I just want to say this. Finally, she has a resort. There are two parts of this bill that she can resort to. The first is the Friendly Societies and Credit Unions Act amendment. And if there's any place that the current Minister of Justice needs to go, it is surely a friendly society, because she's running out of them here. She's running out of her friends around here, and she could go along to a friendly society and find that there are people who just want to be friends, regardless of the character of the people they're dealing with. But finally, if all of that fails, Mr Speaker, there is the changes to the Births, Deaths and Marriages Act in this bill, because the provisions in this bill make it easier to change your name. And so if you are a Minister of Justice who leaves the post under a cloud because of very serious allegations of impropriety and misconduct, and she cannot get another job either as a retailer of liquor or of anything else, then she can go along to the Registrar of Births, Deaths and Marriages and she can change her name, because there will be a new form provided for under this bill, under the amendment in this bill, and it will be easier for her to change her name. And so she has prospects, and she has prospects, and she has a future. But after all of that, Mr. Speaker, after all of that, notwithstanding the apparent setting up of alternatives for the present Minister of Justice, we will support this legislation because these are good changes for the people of New Zealand.
I recognise the honourable member, Chris Ockenvold.